Today we are working on Lesson 6 of Module 3, Rational Numbers on the Number Line, and you need to be on page 49 of your book. So we're going to start with the opening exercise. In letter A, it asks us to write the decimal equivalent of each fraction. So if we look at 1/2, we can think of money, and we can think of what we know about 1/2, half of 100, or half of 10. And so our decimal equivalent would be 5/10 or 50 hundredths, which would be written like this. 4/5. There's a couple ways we can think of that. We can obviously divide, or we can also think of making 4/5 equivalent to something over 100. Anytime we're doing a decimal equivalent, we can always change it to a percent first, which will be a percent over 100, and then find that decimal. So I know that 5 times 20 is 100, so 4 times 20 is 80. So I know that would mean that my decimal would be 80 hundredths, or it could also be 8/10, because those are equivalent. 6 and 7/10. So I know 6 is going to be my whole number. Where I say my and, I would have a decimal point. And actually, when I say 7/10, I'm saying what the decimal needs to look like. I need to have a 7 in the tenths place. You could also write 6 and 70 hundredths, also equivalent. At the bottom, letter B says write the fraction equivalent of each decimal. So again, this time we're looking at the decimal, and we need to write the fraction. So we would want to put this decimal over 100, because the way we read this is 42 hundredths. So we put 42 over 100. As we're looking at 42 and 100, divisibility rules tell us that they can both be divided by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2. 42 divided by 2 is 21, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. So it would be 21/50ths in simplest form. My next decimal is 3 and 75 hundredths. So again, I can write that exactly the way it said. 3 is my whole number, and I know my fraction is 75 over 100 because it's 75 hundredths. I can also look at 75 hundredths and know right away that that's going to be equivalent to 3/4. So my simplified fraction is 3 and 3/4, because 25 divides into 75 3 times and into 100 4 times. Last decimal, 36 and 90 hundredths. So again, 36 is my whole number. Where my and is tells me where my fraction starts. So 90 over 100 is how we would write 90 hundredths. I can definitely simplify 90 hundredths by dividing by 10, which really just cancels out these zeros. So I have 36 and 9/10. Turn to page 50. We're going to do the example 1. Example 1 has a couple paragraphs at the beginning, but really we're just going to look at what it asks us to do on example 1, which is locate and graph the number 3/10 and its opposite on a number line. So when you see a fraction that you're graphing on the number line, you want to look at your denominator to tell you how you're going to divide your number line, because notice you have a 0, a 1, and a -1. So if I want to show 3/10, I know I'm going to need to divide my number line by tenths, and I'm going to need to take my positive numbers to the right and my negative numbers to the left. So that's going to look like this: 1/10, 2/10. And again, you want to make sure that you are trying to space the segments of your number line out the best that you can. It's okay if it's not perfect, if you end up with some of them crowded together, because that happens, as long as you understand that each segment is worth 1/10. I don't need to write 10/10 when I get to this 1, because 1 is 10/10, so I'm going to put it below it and kind of put it in parentheses. 1 whole is 10/10. On my negative side, I'm going to have a -1/10. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. It should mirror. Remember, we talked about that symmetry. The negative side of your number line should mirror the positive side of your number line. So I know when I get to this -1, I'm going to have a -10/10. And again, see, it's hard sometimes to space out, and that's okay. It's also sometimes hard just to get those numbers where they need to go if you have big handwriting like I do, so just do your best. So -10/10. So we want to locate and graph the number 3/10 and its opposite. So 3/10, graph it means we're going to put a point on the line. And we know that its opposite is going to be this -3/10. So I'm going to put a little arrow over to its opposite, -3/10. Exercise 1 says use what you know about the point -7/4 and its opposite to graph both points on the number line below. The fraction -7/4 is located between which two consecutive integers? Explain your reasoning. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to count the tick marks, which are these, on our number line and see where our 0 is going to go in the middle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So since there are 17 tick marks, I know that I can go to 9, and that can be my middle, and I would have 8 on either side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You're going to put a 0. And then we're going to be looking at our denominator. So our denominator is 4, and that tells me that I need to have fourths on my number line. So again, my positive goes to the right. So I'm going to have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, which is also 1 whole. So I can put a 1 below there. 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, and 8/4, which is also 2. On my negative side, it should mirror -1/4, -2/4, -3/4, -4/4, -5/4. Underneath that -4/4, you want to put a -1 in parentheses, -6/4, -7/4, and -8/4, which is going to be a -2 in parentheses. So now that I have my number line numbered, I want to show -7/4 and its opposite. So -7/4 would be right here on the number line. I know that its exact opposite is going to be a +7/4, which is going to be all the way over here. So I'm going to put a arrow, and I'm going to graph 7/4. So on the number line, each segment has a length of 1/4, and the fraction is located between, meaning the original fraction, not its opposite. The fraction is located between -1 and -2. And next you're going to turn to the next page, example 2, rational numbers and the real world. So example 2 says rational numbers and the real world. We are on page 51. The water level of a lake rose 1 2/25 feet after it rained. Answer the following questions using the number line below. So this number line, vertical number line, is kind of showing us the lake. And its original level, which is at that 0. So this gray part would be water. And it says write a rational number to represent the situation. So we want to write a rational number to represent this situation. So obviously our decimal of it is 1 2/25, but we also want to write that as a fraction. So the way we would say that as a fraction is 1 1/4, because 25 over 100 would simplify to 1/4. What two integers is 1 2/25 between on a number line? So if I look, I would know that it would be between 1 and 2. 1 2/25 would be somewhere between 1 and 2. Write the length of each segment on the number line as a decimal and a fraction. So what we want to think about is what would the length of each segment of this number line be? Well, we know that if we want it to be 1 2/25 or 1 1/4, then similar to the number line that we just did, we're going to have to break this number line into fourths if we're going to be able to show it. So that means that each segment of the number line is going to be worth either 25/100 as a decimal or 1/4 on the number line. What will the water level be after it rained? Graph the point on the number line. So that just means we're graphing the point that it shows us. So it tells us that it rose to 1 2/25 feet after it rained. So that means that I'm looking at 1. And I know that it's going to be 1 1/4 or 1 2/25. Either way I want to think about it. Between 1 and 2, there are segments. So this will be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and then all the way up to 2. So 1 1/4 is going to be right the segment, the tick line or segment right after the 1, between the 1 and 2. So again, this is 1. This would be 1 1/4. What will the water level be after it has rained? And this is just how we say it. We either say 1 2/25 or 1 1/4 feet above the original water level. So it rained a lot. Obviously, and the whole lake rose a foot and 25 hundredths, or 1 1/4. After 2 weeks have passed, the water level of the lake is now the opposite of the water level when it rained. So now we're looking at the opposite of this 1 25 hundredths, or 1 1/4 feet. What will the new water level be? Graph the point on the number line and explain how you determined your answer. So the opposite of 1 25 hundredths, or 1 1/4, is going to be a negative 1 1/4, or negative 1 25 hundredths. So I would have to come down here between -1 and -2. I would need to graph that. And we would say the water level would be 1 25 hundredths, or 1 1/4 feet below the original water level. The opposite of 1 25 hundredths, or 1 1/4, because we're writing both, is -1 25 hundredths, or -1 1/4, however you would like to say it. We are not going to do letter F on this page. So we are done with today's lesson. When you're finished, raise your hand so that I can check your work. Please leave your book open, and then you will work on IXL or FlowCAB.